I'm expecting a package, so I may have to step out of the recording. Listen, this is life. We all work with each other on this, okay? So if someone over on the talk can be ready to jump in for me, I would appreciate that. Kodak will definitely let us know when FedEx is here, so no worries there. But I had to go live today because the DNC has released its autopsy report, and it's actually considerably worse than I thought. So, like I said, normally we don't broadcast the show live, but this is a good time to remind you to please go ahead and follow the show on your favorite podcasting platform. And like I said, the reason we're going to go live today is we're going to break down the DNC autopsy report that came out. So welcome to the show. I don't have my typical jokes. I don't have my typical trivia of the show today. So it's just one thing today. But before I get into that one thing, I'm just going to make something very clear. Yesterday, I shared a story about South Carolina enacting a bill which basically prohibits trans students in K through 12 from using shared bathrooms unless it is the bathroom assigned to their gender or to their sex at birth. And the result of which is if the school does not have a single-use bathroom facility, that trans children in our schools will be forced to go use a porta potty outside, which obviously, it categorically identifies them for who they are, but also is just incredibly dehumanizing. And the reason I bring this up is that I also posted that on Threads, and our audience here is very curated. I take time to make sure that we have a safe and open space, um, and that's important to me. Please don't spam the chat right now. Like, this is an important conversation. Please don't be spamming the chat. This is important. If you're not willing to listen right now, just leave. This is an important conversation. I'm very passionate about this because I myself have had to really learn to understand that what's happening to trans individuals in the United States of America. And what's happening to trans individuals in the United States of America could much more closely be described as a genocide because of what this administration is doing and now these states are doing. And I'm very concerned about what comes next. When you start forcing people to use bathrooms outside porta potties, when you start categorizing them so indifferently, this is what leads to dehumanization. And I bring this up because in the last 18 months, the permission structure for people to dehumanize trans individuals in the United States is growing. And I saw it with visceral reality yesterday. And I just want to say I'm very concerned about it. I am concerned that people are being given the permission structure to other trans individuals. And the result of what comes after that is very, 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 very dangerous. And it is here now. The United States government is actively medically experimenting on trans individuals in prisons, denying them care. Every time I try to talk about this information is heavily restricted on social media, as it is now. Clearly, you can see it's restricted over there. But it is something I wanted to just talk about. What I saw yesterday was disgusting. There are sick people in this country, and it's disgusting. Anyways, let's get on to the main story today. Just one story. We have no guests today, just 192 pages of the most expensive failure to self-reflect in the history of American politics. You'll have to forgive me. I am relying on my script because I didn't have a ton of time to prepare. But as you probably know, the DNC has been hiding their post-2024 election report. They titled it, by the way, Build to Win, Build to Last. So I read every page of that document. And before I give you a single number, before I tell you what's in the document, I do want to read you something because the DNC, the official institution behind the Democratic Party, put a disclaimer in their own report right at the top on every single page. 192 pages has the same disclaimer. This document reflects the views of the author, not the DNC. The DNC was not provided with the underlying sourcing, interviews, or supporting data for many of the assertions contained herein, and therefore cannot independently verify the claims presented. So, what the DNC is saying is they cannot verify the claims of their own autopsy report. They commissioned this report. They paid for this report. They put their name on the report. I wanted to quote a Reddit user. Actually, can't say their username. It's pretty funny. Here's what they said. I hate it because it's worse than I thought. It isn't hiding some smoking gun. The smoking gun is they never gave a shit about it in the first place. That's exactly how I feel. I think we were waiting for some big revelation from the Democratic Party that they're finally waking up. But what this report details is a fundamental disconnect from the American experience, the DNC's own voter base. And it's actually quite alarming. Let's get into what the document is. So let me give you the full background here. It was authored by a consultant. No surprise there, right? The consultant is named Mia Ehrenberg. That is who the metadata on the PDF refers it to. The DNC chair himself, Ken Martin, commissioned the report. And here's a detail that explains everything. According to Martin's own interview on Pod Save America, the DNC did not pay for the report. He said it was free. It was done by somebody in the orbit of DNC leadership. Here's another comment from Reddit. Didn't Ken Martin just get one of his pals to do this for free? I always thought it was more likely that they buried the autopsy because it was a shoddy piece of work than that it had controversial findings. Another one said it. He said on Pod Save America that they did not pay for this report, which actually raises more questions than it answers because it does seem to explain why it's so bad. When you read this autopsy, the DNC autopsy, what you find is that after this devastating loss in the 2024 election, the best thing that they could do was to get a free paper from someone. So the DNC, after losing the White House, the Senate, and the House, and watching its own party hemorrhage working class voters, commissioned a free autopsy, allegedly, from a friend of the chair of the DNC. So let's get into it. So the first section is executive summary. They did not include the executive summary in the leaked report or the release report. The next page, House of Representatives section, pending, need to adjust for a few House lines. This section was not provided. Here's what someone on Reddit said about that. The leadership messaging section at the beginning being blank is so on point for the current DNC leadership. Another person said, the best part is page 2 titled Leadership Message is just blank. We know. Here's the part that makes the document extraordinary as an artifact. It came back to the DNC annotated, not by journalists, not by myself. It was annotated by another fact checker who went through the document in the review process, and they left notes in the margin. Here are some of the phrases you encounter over and over in the margins. Quote, no evidence provided, no source data, unsourced claims, contradicts public reporting, numbers appear inaccurate on public data, analysis is not supported by public available data, mathematical errors present. These annotations in the report happen dozens of times on the electoral section, on battleground analysis, on the research and strategy, on the technology, on the fundraising section. So they have a report, an autopsy, and their own fact checker says none of this information is supported. Here's some specific factual errors that I found while I was reading the report. The report says John Boehner resigned in 2014. He actually resigned in 2015. That is a verifiable fact. The report describes Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin as states that had, quote, consistently and reliably voted for Democratic candidates. The fact checker flagged all 3 of those states voted for Trump in 2016. The very states that they're citing as reliable blue states had cracked 8 years before the election that they're analyzing. The report says Democrats retained governorships in only 2 states in 2024, Washington and North Carolina. The number is actually 3. That's massive. They apparently forgot about Delaware entirely. The fundraising section contains what the fact checker identifies as, quote, mathematical errors in a section about how Democrats should better track their money. Let's think about that. It has math errors in the section of reporting about tracking the money. Here's another Reddit user. The glut of factual errors and lack of critical analysis and creative thought is staggering. It reads like a low effort first semester freshman paper. Another one said he received a shit deliverable, and instead of fixing it or redoing it or reassigning it, he pretended for 6 months that it was full of great lessons and ultimately forced to release the piece of shit anyway. Let's go on to segment 3. In 2024, the Democrats raised and spent more than $8 billion in federal elections. $8 billion. Harris raised $1.37 billion on 2 joint fundraising committees, the Harris Victory Fund and the Harris Action Fund. The president raised $1.09 billion in 3 committees. On advertising specifically, Harris and affiliated committees spent $903 million on ads. Trump spent $435 million. Harris outspent Trump on advertising by 2-1. She spent twice what he spent on ads and lost. Here's the part that should really end the debate on the conversation. Media spending by the Harris campaign and affiliated committees, approximately $1.04 billion. Investment in organizing, voter contact, and field operations, $150 million. They spent 7-1 on advertising instead of actually putting people on the ground to do the actual work. Advertising, which by the way was not good advertising, they spent 7-1, $1.04 billion. They raised all of that money, $1.04 billion. They spent on fucking TV ads, basically, and internet ads. And they spent only $150 million on ground organizing efforts. Even this shitty report, by the way, acknowledges that. They wrote that under old spending cap rules, campaigns would allocate 20 to 30% of their budget to organizing. You do not have to be an election expert to know that nobody under the age 55 gets their political inspiration from the fucking television. Okay? Nobody. As someone on Reddit said, all that money spent on the campaign and $99 on this piece of shit. Exactly. Let's give the advertising breakdown a little bit more. Harris' overall broadcast share was 42% of her media mix. Trump's was 56%. So Harris was actually more digitally focused than Trump, which the report uses as evidence that she was adapting. But the part they don't confront directly, even Harris's supposedly more digital approach resulted in $1 billion going to television and radio, while $115 million went to people actually knocking on doors. And the thing that the report does not acknowledge, that these people don't understand, is that the president, Trump, he didn't have to spend money on digital because the Republicans are kicking the Democrats' ass in digital. They have people do it for free. People make these memes and these posts for the president, these weird AI images of the president, and it's free. Segment 4, organizing catastrophe. Let's walk through the field data. In 2024, the Democratic Coordinated Program made $370 million voter contact attempts in battleground states. That is an enormous number until you look at what the attempts actually produced. So they tried to get to voters 370 million times. They only made 11.7 million contacts, 3.2%. 53% of all voter contacts were phone calls. Contact rate, 2.2%. 38.4 text messages, 0.8%. 8% of voter contact rate, 17%. So they try to get a hold of voters by knocking on the door less than 10% of the time, but it had more response than every other method combined. Door-to-door canvassing resulted in 50% of all voter IDs, in other words, contacting voters, but they spent $150 million on it. Nothing. 72% of all door-to-door voter IDs were collected in the final month of the campaign, while people were literally casting their ballots. None of this makes sense. Here's what we found out about the polling operation. They found about their own ads from the press. The research and strategy section of this report is the most damning part of the whole document, because it doesn't just show incompetence, it's showing us what it looks like, what they did when they found out information they didn't want to know. So let's start with the polling team. According to the report, the quote messaging polling team, the people whose job it was to figure out how voters were responding, was not fully onboarded until December 2023. less than a year away. The polling team never reviewed ad copy before the ads aired. The post-debate survey was scrapped. They didn't poll after the worst night of Biden's campaign because they didn't want to see the numbers. Insane. A Reddit user says, how does this report only mention Biden 4 times? The DNC still wants to pretend there was nothing wrong with Biden when the fact that a president stepping down from a re-election months before the vote is unheard of. 4 times in the entire report. Only 4 times they mention Biden. Although Biden's failure as a campaign is largely attributed to why we're even here. Campaign leadership didn't move, right? Here's a section from the report about differentiating on immigration. A single speech delivered on a Friday afternoon with their phrase, little amplification. They thought they were brought. Okay, I'm sorry, having trouble reading this part here. The inability to move Trump's favorability numbers was a major failure, as the report says. The retrospective job approval for Trump was too high going into the campaign. Republicans had defined a playbook for attacking Harris, and Democrats had no consistent theory for attacking Trump. That's true. The most successful time they were in the entire campaign was that section when Tim Walz was doing the whole J.D. Vance couch situation. That was the most effective part of the campaign. All right, here we go. Next part. Voters who said the economy was their top issue voted for Trump 81%. Section 6, the demographics. Harris won 40% of men nationally. Josh Stein, running for governor of North Carolina, won 51% of men. That is an 11-point difference. Here's what the report doesn't say. Stein won more male voters because he ran on a record of actually doing things, right? Prosecuting fentanyl, consumer protection, and he did that in a state where his opponent, Mark Robinson, was a man who called. Oh, I can't say that. You guys remember Mark Robinson? He said a bunch of weird stuff on a bunch of adult websites. The 11-point gap is not a messaging problem for Harris. It's a consequence of how the Harris campaign ran. Harris fell below 50% with new voters for the first time in modern Democratic history. She got 48% of first participants. Josh Stein in North Carolina got 56%. Bob Ferguson in Washington got 57%. Even the candidate who lost, Matt Craig in New Hampshire, got 50% of new voters. Latino voters. Starr County, Texas, 97% Hispanic, voted for Republican for the first time since 1892. Voter registration. In 2008, 7 jurisdictions had major Democratic enrollment. In 2024, only 2. And Section 7. This is where we kind of get ideological. And I want to get careful about this part because it is definitely ideology. Okay, so the report invokes the 1989 to 1992 period as the explicit model for Democratic recovery. They name Ron Brown specifically. They quote Barack Obama praising Ron Brown. They describe Brown leading Democrats out of the, quote, political wilderness by supporting candidates putting people first, prioritizing the economy, and offering America hope. And they reproduce this quote from Ron Brown directly. He challenged the Democratic Party to, quote, get real about the politics of success. So the Democrats' strategy of moving ahead is to go back to 1989. Well, what happened after that? Bill Clinton. What happened after that? Well, you have NAFTA, you have welfare reform, you have the crime bill, you have the deregulation of financial markets, and you have everything that led up to 2028. So the Democrats' response to everything that happened with losing was, let's go back to 1989 and the Clinton era where we fucked everything up. A Reddit user said, this document is basically saying, keep doing what we're already doing, but louder. Yeah. Another Reddit user says, this is what it looks like when you're starting with a conclusion and trying to find out what to justify it. And of course, there are 3 things that the report does not cover. Number 1, and most importantly, Gaza does not appear in the document one time. The word genocide does not appear in the document one time. The phrase uncommitted movement does not appear in the document one time. The hundreds of thousands of Michigan voters who voted uncommitted in the Democratic primary as an explicit protest on what happened in Gaza do not exist in the document one time. Harris lost Michigan. The uncommitted movement was specifically concentrated in Michigan. One Reddit user says, 192 pages and not a single measure of the party's uncritical support of Israel becoming radioactive. Sure, Jan. Another one says, no mention of Gaza, Palestine, or genocide, just like the DNC campaign. And number 2, Biden. Biden is mentioned 4 times in the 192-page document. The report treats the Biden to Harris switch as just an external event. 4 times. This historic event of a president stepping down from his reelection campaign is mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4 times in 192 pages. I don't know about you, but when I watched Biden's debate, I was listening to it in my car, I was working, and the instant that Joe Biden began speaking in that debate, I got sick to my stomach. The first sentence that came out of his mouth, I said, oh my God, he's going to lose. There's nothing they can do. This is the worst debate in the history of American political politics. I can't believe they let him go up to that microphone. He was clearly cognitively failing. He was clearly not well. It was mortifying. It will go down in history as one of the biggest failures in a presidential campaign ever, if not the single biggest failure. And they didn't even mention him. And the last one, most damningly, policy. There is not a single substantive policy reform in this entire document, which I think says quite enough. The last section of today's show is the real lesson. What if the working class voters who drifted away from Democrats didn't make the mistake? What if they looked at 2 parties, one that made explicit promises to hurt them, and then one that made implicit promises not to deliver for them? Starr County, 97% Hispanic, voting for Republican for the first time since 1892. What if the young men that swung hard for Trump in Nevada and Arizona weren't confused about their own interests, but they were correctly identifying that neither party's economic agenda was going to get them ahead? What about the union households in Ohio who voted for Trump, simultaneously reelecting a Democrat to the Senate? What if these people are teaching us that you don't fix representation with advertisements? You don't fill trust gaps with data points? This report is a disaster. They didn't release this report not because they were hiding something from us. They didn't release this report because they learned nothing. This report is the most damning evidence that the Democratic Party is not interested in changing. We have less than 6 months before the midterms, and the Democrats did nothing. They did not try to diagnose what happened. They did not try to understand how to be better. They did not even acknowledge what hundreds of millions of Americans could clearly see with their own eyes, which is that Joe Biden was not cognitively efficient, operating well enough to be president of the United States, let alone to run for re-election. And they don't even have the courage to openly admit that. And honestly, what I will close with saying, I don't understand why they released this report. This is embarrassing. I'm trying to think of a metaphor. Imagine you have a kid in a baseball team, okay? and you go to the baseball team every game. You go every Saturday to their baseball game, T-ball. Let's say T-ball, and every time the kids get up to go to T-ball, your kids' team, you get up, and the kids just have no idea what to do. And they go up to bat and they hit the ball and it goes like backwards to the side. And Saturday after Saturday after Saturday, you watch your kid play T-ball and his team just always loses. And it's not even close. It's like just a walloping. And at the end of the season, the coach puts out a report and the coach is like, yeah, I don't know what happened. You know, we spent the whole time swimming and, I just thought it would work out. But at least that's something. At least they were doing something athletic. I don't know. The fact that the Democratic Party has taken all of this time after this historic failure and released this report, which is a historic failure of its own, is embarrassing. I hope this breakdown was informative. I would normally say, hey, go read the report for yourself. Don't waste your time. It's a joke. It's a joke of a report. It's a joke of a party. They have learned nothing. They continue to put us in danger every single day by their lack of action. They are actively endangering us. I started the show talking about trans individuals and how they are in danger. This report makes it clear. They don't even care. And so it should remind you 192 pages of this. We have only one chance, and that is each other. Building community, organizing, and pushing back hyperlocally. That's what we teach you here to do on Rebel Radio and the Ignition News. My dog is like barking in his sleep now. That's okay. He's having nightmares. Thanks for tuning into the special edition of the show. We will be live for our normally scheduled broadcast on Friday. Don't waste your time reading the report. It's garbage. We'll see you back tomorrow. Good stuff.